This is Progressive Insider.
Yeah, Progressive Insider, you know they wiser. This that new media company covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard of, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know they don't think that you could see under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, they may not be famous, but their stories should be heard. Yeah, every voice matters, we should rise and fall together.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Hair of the Dog on Monday, March 30th. This is definitely for me. I can't speak for Andy, but for me, this would have qualified for a wake and bake, but did not get my stuff together right now. So, good morning, Andy.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Maybe on Wednesday.
Right. Well, so part of the problem is I have really, really strong coffee and I'm not awake. So I'm sleepy and jittery at the same time.
Yes. You got the best of both worlds.
Right.
The coffee made you jittery and didn't wake you up. Congratulations.
Exactly. So I have quite a bit to talk about. We don't have a guest this morning, so we'll go as long as we possibly can and still keep it somewhat entertaining and interesting. But Annie, I'm gonna let you go first. How was your weekend?
It was bittersweet. Just because my wife went out the door to work at the hospital today, and she's not stepping back in this house until the crisis is over.
Wow. So,
Yeah, she just decided, she figured that the dangers that she was in at work were too great for the rest of us in the house, and she decided she's moving out to our trailer, and the weekend was spent getting that all ready.
right.
We were, and of course, as you know, it's still fairly cool out, so there's other things that have to be considered when you're getting ready to move into a trailer, especially when you're dealing with the possibility of water freezing and, that kind of thing. So, like our trailer, we use quite a bit in the summer months, but we've never used it this time of year, and we don't, obviously, for what we use it, we don't need like any type of television system or set up that way. So getting it ready for those kind of things for somebody staying at long term posed a little bit of a challenge for me, especially considering it's been raining for the last 2 days, and trying to climb up the antenna tower to get to the satellite dish to install a new wire was a little bit of a challenge. At least it wasn't thunder and lightning.
Yeah, I'm impressed. The lengths we'll go to. So my question for you, and if this is obviously way too close to home, feel free to skip it. But in talking to Deb, she kind of epitomizes most nurses. Nobody gets into this field to make $1 million, right? Yeah, so they obviously drive and passion, and they do it because it literally saves lives. So how does a spouse, like I had the issue with my spouse in that he wasn't taking it seriously, and then he of course is invincible. So now you have a nurse who has this tremendous drive to save lives and take care of a crisis, and she's going to be in a trailer in your driveway. How do you keep an eye on her to make sure that she's not doing the natural thing that most people do? I'm fine. It's it's just a slight fever. It's just a slight cough. How are you going to do that?
Well, the one thing that I would say that why that wouldn't apply to Deb is the fact that she has been an OR nurse her entire career, right? And that department is the epitome of cleanliness and sterility, right? So they're always concerned with washing their hands, wearing the proper protective equipment. Like the nurses, they show the nurses in their masks and their face shields and their gowns and all the stuff they have to wear. OR nurses have to wear that stuff every day. So Deb's been doing that for over 20 years. So it's just normal for her. That's not it's not a big deal. They are, the main problem, I guess, right now is that you have to assume that each patient that comes into the OR for surgery has the virus. And so they've put new procedures in which will protect the any of the professionals in the room at the time. And the main problem comes from intubation and extubation, right? Because there's a lot of sputum that's involved in that, and that's where the virus lives at its strongest concentration, as far as I know. So they actually, if you look at it, typically there's 4 in the room: the surgeon, the anesthetist, or the anesthesiologist, depending on, you know, what country you're from, the circulating nurse, and the scrub nurse. And Deb's the scrub nurse. Well, the surgeon and the scrub nurse have to leave the operating theater before the patient can either be intubated or extubated. So they're not even in the room when that happens, because there's a lot of droplets that are generated from that procedure. So the entire time of the pre and post and during the surgery, the circulating nurse and the anesthetist have to be in full gear all the time, full protective gear, that any of the people that are dealing with the patients do. And Deb and the surgeon leave the room for both the intubation and the extubation. Then once it's done, then a cleaning crew comes in with the same gear, completely hoses down the entire room from top to bottom. And that's after 30 minutes of waiting time for all water droplets to go to the floor, right? Leave the air. So they're very good procedures, and they're being they're almost they're overkill as far as, like, they're extra than you would think you would need, which is good for the operating room, right? Because the patients are so susceptible to infection, right? So the other thing about it is the OR isn't necessarily going to see an uptick in surgeries because there's no way to treat the coronavirus, especially through surgery. So the patients, the regular patients, are the emergency patients are the one that are coming in for surgery. All the elective surgery has been canceled. So any of that stuff isn't even happening. So they're running on a smaller crew because of all those cancellations. So I think Debbie's she's trying to weigh it in her own mind about when she might be a danger to us. And I think, although it's a tough thing to do, and we can support her from here. Like, I can bring her things. I can make her meals and bring her fresh clothes, and that's, so it's not an issue. But I think that even just peace of mind knowing that she's not bringing the virus home to us every day, which is probably what it comes down to.
Right. So just in my situation, because I have Mr. Invincible here, it was almost like I was the warden, because he'd be puttering around doing his thing, griping or whatever, his usual. And then I would just be listening. Did he cough? What's his fever like? And then he actually started to exhibit some of the symptoms. So I cracked down on him so hard. And there was much screaming and gnashing of teeth. And finally, it came down to threats of bodily harm. And I think we talked about a divorce. No, it wasn't divorce. It was Well, here's how much you get when you die. So go ahead.
Oh,
So,
it wasn't like trial separation or anything like that.
No, it was because by that time I was already sick.
Right.
So I was trying to, I mean, I had scrubbed my hands raw, trying to keep him from getting it, and he got it anyway.
Right.
So by that time I was on the upswing. So I was, you know, like I said, as soon as it hit for him, I was right there. Here's your tonic. Here's everything and I had already been, all spouses do this. We manipulate our spouse. So things that I would make for dinner were strategic, right? So I was putting in the fruits and vegetables and things in a strategic way to elevate certain nutrients. And some of them were a little weird, but I was like, I gotta get those garbanzo beans in there. Hold on. So I had already been doing that with him. So the minute that he started to exhibit what I interpreted as symptoms, I was on him like that. But I was in the same house. So I could closely monitor, you know, and overcome his denial.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's it's tough because you're always, and I always try to think logically about my own situation and apply logic to everything that I do. I'm not always successful, but I try. And, you know, I've been isolated here for coming up on 3 weeks, right? And been really diligent about making sure that this is a safe space, right? But the variable has always been Debbie coming and going to work every day, right? And so you have to start to wonder, well, is this all for naught, right? It's and that's I had to go out once. I went to a gas station to fill up the truck with gas, fill up my 2 tanks for the trailer with propane. And that's all I did. And I brought a mask with me. I brought gloves with me. I didn't get within 10 feet of anybody. The place was pretty much empty anyways. But like but now how much does that even matter? And I go home and my wife gets in her car and goes to work in a hospital where there's coronavirus patients every day.
Right.
And comes.
That's
right?
exactly right. And this morning I sent my husband off to work. So one of the things that I think has been helpful working here was we had the interview with Dr. Burdett, and he was talking about how the regular layperson is not trained in proper use of gloves and masks and how to use these things properly. So in thinking of that, and what he talked about was aseptic technique. So I will post a link here of an article from Medium that I thought was extraordinarily helpful. This was from a woman who had, I think she said it was a bone marrow transplant. So she had to live herself for 2 months with no immunity. And she had to employ aseptic technique to protect herself. And she just has this really great outline of how she did it. And she explains it in such a simple way. So my original thought was my poor husband, when he comes in the house, I was like, you're going to strip down naked. We're going to package up your clothing, take them immediately to, and so in my head, I was going overboard for what is actually needed. And the way she described it is very simple. When she would leave the house, obviously she wore a mask when she went out. When she came back, she would wipe down the steering column, her car keys, and the handle to her car. And then she would come in and wipe down the doorknob on the inside. And then she would take off her gloves and wipe off her keys and everything else, take her shoes off, put on house shoes. And then she had already gone through the house to wipe down surfaces. So she said those simple steps between coming and going were enough to keep her safe in her very compromised situation. So I'll include that link because to me, I was like, okay, so I had gone overboard. I'm like, do I burn his clothes? Do I just wash them? And
Yeah.
but the reality is, if you think about it in a pragmatic way, you can protect yourself and your household so that once you are in the house and you've done those few steps, now you're in a sanctuary type of environment. So I think that'll be really helpful, not just for, you know, my peace of mind, but for everyone else to kind of get a crash course in what this should look like for your own health.
Well, of course. And I agree with that completely. It's how much are you even really doing? The chances that unless Deb actually is, you know, gotten the virus herself, if she's infected with it, then it really doesn't make a difference for the last 2 weeks that she's been here or not. She hasn't exhibited any symptoms. I know that doesn't, but it's been over a lengthy time period. Now, a stray bit of virus on her clothing, the chances of that infecting anyone in our family is so minute, right? And so when you think about the whole thing, what you're doing in your own house is more for your own sanity. It's more for your own peace of mind, right? That I feel I've set up a safe space here, and as pissed off that this has happened, and as fucking bored out of my mind as I might currently be, thank God everybody's getting on the new app House Party, you know, so I can talk to my friends. At least you're in your safe environment, and you know you're, at least in your own mind, protected from the disease, right? And you've made this the boundary of this area, and it's, so everything's good. And I think that that's as important as anything, right? Because psychologically and mentally we have to survive this too. That's just as big.
Excellent point. And it's funny because my best friend had her birthday, and her birthday party was all virtual on Saturday. And what she did was, what was it? Jukebox TV, I think it was called. She purchased, it was a nominal purchase. It was a series of games that we were playing together. So she was live streaming it on her screen, and we could play on our cell phones. So we did, you know, one was a Q&A type of race game, and then another was we were stand-up comedians in competition. And you, although it's not ideal, we are social creatures. It was the next best thing, and it was nice because we had like 20 people in this little party, and it made her feel better because, you know, she's stuck in the house on her birthday with no contact. But these, you're right, it's the mental health part of it too that
Right.
focus on.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and they see, that's another good thing about being in Canada, is that, you know, Prime Minister Trudeau has taken the lead on a lot of being a little more proactive about this than other countries that will remain nameless. So he's gone into lockdown, and surprisingly, the premier, the very ultra conservative premier of Ontario, has also done a fairly good job, right? And that's one thing I've noticed in Canada, is that even people have reached out from behind party lines and said that our governments are doing some actual good. Like, I have to hand it to the guy. I hate him. I hate his party, but I have to hand it to him. He's actually done some good things and initiated stuff. So we're seeing that. And on top of everything, right, because of the way that it works in Canada, because we have a little bit higher taxes here than in the US, just, you know, for the facade of paying for stuff, as we've talked about that before. But they've made the beer store and the liquor store an essential service, which is very important, right?
we actually have that too.
Yes.
That's about all that we have. But
That's right. Yes. If you're going to be stuck in your home, you know, get an app so you can talk to your friends, and, you know, go down and get a couple of cases of beer, a case of wine, you know, some nice bottles of liquor, and enjoy your solitude.
Right. So I want to switch gears a little bit because most of the evening last night I was talking to friends and acquaintances around the world because I wanted to know, okay, I'm so stuck on what's going on in my own house, my own backyard, and our country. And, you know, if you're in the US, it's a, let's be honest, it's a shit show. It absolutely is. And we have so many things going wrong politically in a time where it should be apolitical, that it's just frustrating. But we'll get to that in a second. So I started looking at, okay, well, what's going on in the rest of the world? Because to me, it seems like a possible preview of what we have to look forward to in the coming weeks. So I reached out to, there was a student, Jamai, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. She's an exchange student who is in South Korea, and she's in Seoul. And I talked to her a little bit. I'm like, what's going on? How are you? Are you comfortable? And her take on what was going on there was, I think, a positive note, because she had moved to Seoul as an exchange student. She's working on her master's degree. And she had moved there about a month and a half ago. So right before it hit in South Korea. And so she went through all of the quarantine and the chaos and everything else. She herself did not get sick because they were very fast there to do a quarantine. And
Yes.
she said now there's, you know, minimal cases. Minimal is, you know, relative. But she said that they have lifted the quarantine, and even now her friends are, she will go to a friend's house. They're not quite yet comfortable to be out on the streets. And she was going to send me video of walking around in the street. She said normally it's incredibly crowded. Now it's not, because people are still taking precautions for their own safety and things like that. So then I reached out to a friend of mine who's in Hong Kong, and just to check up on her and her family. And she was saying that things have largely returned to normal in Hong Kong now. She said they're down to 700 cases. And we're talking about 2 countries now that are doing testing. So I am more inclined to believe those numbers than I am from a country like my own where we're not doing testing. So she said that Hong Kong now is down to 700 cases, and they're still taking steps within the local government and hospitals and things to make sure that there isn't reinfection rates and things like that. But she said it's normal. It's normalized now, and people are beginning to turn to work. What was interesting is she was telling me about her family in the Philippines, and she said that in the Philippines, they are still under strict quarantine there because that government has a leader that is akin to our own here, Trump, same kind of mindset and thought process and everything else. And they were a lot slower to address this. So they are still on a strict quarantine. So you figure that the Philippines was about 2 weeks ahead of the US and Canada. So they're still going through it. Then I reached out to, I'm actually working with someone who's helping with an article that we're working on about Jordan and Syria. So she is an American who right now is in Jordan. And I don't want to go too much into her personal business, but she's there assisting a family member who went back for major surgery because it's cheaper and better in Jordan than it is in the United States. So that's why she was there. But then all of this coronavirus hit. So now she's holding in place there. And Jordan does have a self-quarantine all across that area. Jordan and in Jerusalem and all of these places have a self-quarantine, but you can see that some people just aren't taking it seriously. But what we were focused on was you have this refugee camp from Syrian refugees that are stuck in Jordan. And Jordan is not like Saudi Arabia where it's got unlimited funds and things like that. So Jordan is already a little stressed so far as resources and things, but now they have taken in all of these Syrian refugees. So she and I are collaborating on a story that you'll see coming out here in the next week. But what she was looking at is these refugees were allowed to go work to support themselves because aid from foreign countries, particularly the US, has been cut. And they were trying to support themselves. But now, because of the COVID virus, they are in quarantine and they are not permitted to leave the camp. So here you have the multiple effects of poverty, close quarters, lack of resources, and now this pandemic that has reached this group in particular. So it's a dire situation. And then I went and talked to some people that are doing live broadcasts in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and the same thing. What was happening there was, what piqued my interest was an article had come out about the gangs in Brazil who have taken the position that our government doesn't care about us. We care about each other. So
I saw that. Yes.
Yeah, so the gangs themselves have imposed a curfew, and they've gone through the streets with loudspeakers saying, "Hey, your curfew's at 8 o'clock. Try us if you want to. We care about you. We're going to make sure that you stay home, and we're going to look after you." So it's this interesting look from country to country to country about what the response is based on the resources available to them. So now come back to the United States, and here's where it gets interesting. One of the wealthiest nations on the planet also has one of the highest disparities in income inequality. So what we have is a situation where a very small group at the top is going to have the testing available to them, the resources, the medical care, the information, and the access that the majority of the population doesn't. Now, of the majority of the population, you have the subset, which is primarily minorities, but not always, especially in the South. You have a whole lot of white people who are impoverished, who are in conditions worse than what we call a shithole country.
Right.
So you have all of these people who are now stricken with the same issues. So the comparison is closer to a ghetto in Brazil than it would be a neighborhood outside of Paris. Right? So
yes.
And this is why Yale, I forget who it was, I'll look it up, but the head of Yale had predicted that the US was going to be hit far worse and for far longer than any other country because of this income inequality. And I got to thinking about that. And then Nancy had forwarded me a podcast that Max Blumenthal did with, let me look up his name real quick. A wonderful journalist who has bylines practically everywhere. RJ Eskow, E-S-K-O-W, and I'll post the link here. But what was interesting about it is Max Blumenthal has been kind of tracking down the same thing, but he's doing it from a geopolitical standpoint. He was looking at the US during all of this crisis, like we learned early on from the Trump administration, when he starts crowing about something crazy, look in the other direction because this is meant to distract you. So look over here. What shit is he doing? Right?
Yes.
So what better cover than a global pandemic to do some of the worst, most heinous shit you can? Oh, just lost my camera. So what Max was talking about on this particular podcast was we have now issued wanted posters and a reward for the capture or death of Maduro in Venezuela. So remember, we still have this failed coup attempt where we were so
this is phase 2.
Yes, Yes. So if you remember back to Desert Storm, where we had the playing cards, right, of the people that we wanted to capture or kill, we have now just done this for Maduro. And so make of that what you will, but I highly encourage everyone to watch this interview with Max, because of course Max is going to tell it so eloquently that you can't, but it's jaw-dropping, right? So this is what we're doing in Venezuela. At the same time, we have imposed tougher sanctions on Iran, who is going through their own dire situation with the COVID thing. But wait, that's not
But wait, there's more.
There's more. So now at the same time, we have the ramping up of rhetoric, saber rattling is the term, between China and the US. Because Trump has been poking the bear, calling it, instead of the COVID, he's calling it the Chinese virus, right? And he's doing that for a reason. He's either calling it the Chinese or the Wuhan virus, because he is pushing other nations to blame China for this outbreak. And it's predicated on a couple different things. Number one, he wants to make them look bad. Think about high school mean girls, right? So this is a similar tactic. You have the mean girl over there, China, who we don't like. So we're going to talk about her to all our little girlfriends, and something's going to go wrong, and we're going to blow it out of proportion, or maybe it's true, maybe it's not, or I heard. So what they've done is they've talked about China and their response to it, and that China wasn't accurately reporting the numbers, while we're ignoring that we are not accurately reporting the numbers or testing people or getting them treatment. So that has provoked China then to come back and say, well, wait a second, we don't know that it originated in China. And they've actually come out and admitted it did not originate in the wet market as previously reported. They know it didn't. We know it didn't. But what they're saying is, yeah, you remember those stories that you had of these minor outbreaks in Maryland and other areas where you blamed it on vaping? When you remember, we all learned about a condition called popcorn lung because of the liquids in vaping. So now the working theory from China is that, well, maybe it wasn't the vaping, maybe that was an outbreak of one of your bio facilities. And we have them too, make no mistake, we have them, that like, maybe it was an outbreak there because coincidentally, here are these outbreaks right around these facilities. So now you've got Mean Girl China pushing back on Mean Girl US while everybody's going through this. And then the overarching thing, and this is what I really want to talk about, going back to the disparity. The overarching piece that Max talked about in this was the imperialism of it, right? So in the US, we have this income inequality, and it's not by accident. So we can see, based on what's going on in the Trump administration and in our own states, this is not a party thing. It's not red team, blue team thing. The response and the plans have in them a risk and I forget the term, but collateral damage. That there is a certain threshold that is an acceptable risk, an acceptable risk for people to die.
Threat assessment.
Yes. So the threat assessment is an acceptable risk. And what was interesting to me is, in the context of our elections, which is a shit show right now, we have the vote blue no matter who, and I talked to people this weekend who literally said, I will vote for a turnip against Donald Trump. So why would you make such an incredible statement? And it's not just fear of Trump, but now we have a situation where you, Miss Becky with the latte, sitting in your suburban home, are at risk the same way that everyone else has been for years. And here's why I say that. In our country, we have a medical system that everybody thought was fine, where we allowed and we're perfectly accepting of 45,000 people dying every year for lack of access to care. And I want to say that again, 45,000 people died for lack of access to care. They had insurance in most cases. They could not get access and could not afford the policies that they had. Some of these people were on Medicaid, and there are no Medicaid providers. Like the county that I live in, no one will take Medicaid, and very few will take Medicare. And the reason why is this, and I wrote about it. Under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, the number one savings achieved that they celebrate, and you can read this in the CMS quarterly reports, is not because they created efficiencies in the system. It's not because they brought down the cost of care. The efficiencies and cost savings were only because they reduced payments to doctors and hospitals. And that is what they celebrated. And that had the effect of making sure that there were fewer doctors and hospitals available to people. So you were literally holding a policy that you could not use. So under that scenario that we have had for 10 years, everybody was totally okay with 45,000 people dying. It was fine because it wasn't me, right? I had union insurance. I had insurance through my employer. I'm not going to be affected. But now you have this virus that comes in that doesn't care what your income is, doesn't care what you look like, doesn't care about your race or gender or orientation, and you can get it from absolutely anywhere. Now you have people panicking because they can no longer control this environment, and they themselves are at the same risk that they were happy to put everyone else under for years. So that, I think,
that is what's scaring the crap out of everyone across the entire spectrum of the population, right? When I get in my my Range Rover and drive down to Starbucks and go through the drive-through, is there going to be a coronavirus attached to my non-fat latte with caramel drizzle, right?
I don't even know what you just said. Is that really a drink at Starbucks? I don't go. I don't know. A few times that I have been in Starbucks for a meeting or something, I'm looking at the menu and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's all English. I have no idea what this is.
I remember once going to a martini bar with a bunch of people, never having gone before, and seeing this huge banner above the bar of the different types of martinis you could get, walking up to the bar and saying, and the guy saying, "What can I get you? Can I get a martini?" Yeah, what kind? With gin. Just a martini, maybe an olive. You make those? I think so.
They don't know. They're like, this is a little tiny reference at the very bottom of the menu.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, so it's this is the mindset. These are the people now who are freaking the hell out because they have no control.
Right.
They are not protected, and they are not part of this elite class. And I hate to tell you, you never were. But I think what is interesting, and you and I talked about this last week, all of these constructs are starting to crumble, especially when we talk about the financial piece of it. Ain't none of these latte bitches talking about how are we going to pay for it right now. None of them.
I have this picture, of the scruffy dude wearing his MAGA hat, right, and driving in his 06 Ford with the lift kit and the oversized tires, the gun rack across the back window, right, and the don't trust the government stickers on on the tailgate and driving up to the drive-through bank window to cash his socialism check, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the same conversation I had with another gentleman on the left side, which wherever that is anymore.
Yeah.
Well, he is opposed to Medicare for all. And he is also eagerly waiting on his check from the government. He is old enough to have Medicare, but he doesn't think that anyone else should have Medicare for all, the same program that he has. So my question to him was, okay, well, you can see now everything that we've been talking about with MMT, that a lot of this is in fact true. We have Republicans in Congress who will now say, yeah, fiat currency. So with that in mind, you understand that the Medicare that you have today, you actually didn't pay for. It's not your money. It's not some savings account. Your FICA taxes went to the burn pile along with everybody else, right? And he's like, yeah, I got that. I said, so with that in mind, are you going to opt out of your Medicare plan? And he just looked at me and I'm like, no, really? Really, because if you're saying that the rest of the population does not deserve it, should not have it, and should not get it the same way that you got your Medicare plan, are you yourself going to opt out, or are you taking the position, I have it, screw you? And of course, at that point, I'm all type of bitches and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah,
well, that's a prevalent attitude in the U.S. that I've seen over and over and over again. It's not the measuring stick that you use to for success is not even so much what it should be. It's how many things do I own, and not even compared to the people around you, but how much more do I own than the rest of society? How much above them am I? And that's how we measure. That's how you measure success in these horrible ways, right? Like I've got this. I don't care if anybody below me gets it, because then that diminishes my status in society, right? That's absolutely horrible way to look at. Right? It's that rugged individualism rearing its ugly head again.
We're not that rugged, and we're obviously not individuals either. So this whole construct, this idea of what we thought it was. So here we have an idea of what we thought justice was and the rule of law, and you have 4 members of the Senate who have been implicated in insider trading who are still walking around free, no problem.
Well, of course.
And then you have this idea that, well, I have insurance, therefore I'm going to be covered. And no, our hospitals are already overrun. You're screwed. Sorry. And by the way, you might be on the list too, that we turn you away from the hospital with all your money and so all of these constructs now are starting to fall away and reveal themselves for what they are. And what's interesting to me is with that, is bubbling up the idea of the leadership and the elites who still believe that they are different and better than the rest of us, and have built into the plan this number that I almost feel like, and this is incendiary, I get it, I feel like they view this as a blessing, because now they themselves are not going to have to institute policies to get rid of the leeches on society. That's your grandmama. That's your Aunt Sweet. That is you who don't make enough money and you don't work hard enough, even though your productivity is off the chart. No, you don't matter. You are not even worth $15 an hour, because that's way too much for your little grubby ass. So it's going to take care of you. It's going to take care of all the white people in the South who are a drain on the economy. It's going to take care of maybe some people on the fringes, especially our Black and brown people who are already exposed to environmental issues.
Exactly. Yeah. They're such a nuisance.
You're right, exactly. So I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, just watch the news this week and the policies that we implement and the things that we are doing. We rolled back EPA regulations, right? So these people who are already dealing with coal ash and chemicals leaching into the water and all of these things, which are overwhelmingly across the US in minority and poor areas. So you could be white and poor, minority and poor, all of these poor areas. We put those things there. And now they're dealing with this coronavirus. So they have they've got food deserts. They've got all of these issues with lack of access to care and all of their community issues as a whole. Now they've got the pandemic. Well, that's a blessing because it's going to wipe those places out and we'll just go in and gentrify them and then landlords can buy new buildings and things like this. So correct me if I'm wrong, just pay attention this week and see if you don't see it. Because I see it.
That's, you know, you bring up the EPA with the, you know, the relaxing of restrictions on large polluters, right? Under the guise of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out how the two work. We're now saying that, okay, because of the pandemic, we're going to leave it up to large corporations to use their own consciences to not pollute.
Because that's always worked.
Yeah, oh yeah, because it's always been that way, right? Right. It's the poor people that have done all the pollution.
Oh, on top of that, we just in Massachusetts rescinded the land ownership rights for an entire tribe. So yeah, so all of these things are going on at the same time. So all right, before we leave people completely in the gutter crying and clutching a bottle of whiskey, if they can still afford one, right. There is something you can do. So the Democratic Party is complicit in a lot of this, right? So they are trying to prop up, like you even called it out, Andy, weekend at Biden's, right?
Yes, weekend at Biden's.
A veritable husk of a once proud politician. They're propping this person up as somebody who is gonna go against Trump. I don't know in what world, and they know it. They know that this has no chance. So, right. So these are the same people who are profiting off of Trump. Let's be clear. They look at the stock market just as much as he does. So what they are doing is going to a mail-in ballot system for the rest of the primaries. Here's what you need to know. All these Dem-Inter people are the voices that you heard, the prominent voices in Dem-Inter, were probably not on your side. They were trying to get you pissed off enough to leave and to take whatever state you're in, take your registration and just leave. And the reason for that is with these mail-in ballots, the Democratic Party is only going to send a mail-in ballot to a registered Democratic Party member. What would happen now with these mail-in ballots, only certain people get a ballot, only certain people get a vote, and that vote will count. So they are pushing forward Biden on this. So here's what you can do. Your deadline is coming up, I think tomorrow and Wednesday. It's this week. So check your state, especially in Alaska, Wyoming, Wisconsin, and Hawaii. You need to do one of two things, sometimes both. You need to request a mail-in ballot and you need to register for the Democratic Party. So the steps are register as a Democrat first. You can do that online. And then request your mail-in ballot. Do both. Do not wait. You must do this right now today. If you're hearing this message and you are not pulling up a new browser to request this, then it's going to be on you. So if you have friends or family in these states, again, that's Wisconsin, Wyoming, Alaska, and Hawaii, get on the phone with them today. This takes all of 5 minutes to make this correction. Do it. If you don't know anybody in these states, you can get on a phone dialer and make sure that you are reaching people in these states because they are not being told. I guarantee you, go out to those states. Go out and see if any news reporting, any newspaper is talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. So it's up to you. This is the only way that we can counteract huge amounts of money and influence to subvert the democratic process. It should be at one person, one vote, but it's not. And it's not by design. So please make sure that you are either phone banking, or if you live in one of these states, you're doing it. If you know somebody in one of these states, you ask them to do it too. And it all matters, right? This race is not over, not by a long shot. I don't care what people are telling you. We are barely halfway through this thing. And as more states move their primaries past the June deadline, that's their delegate count is now half, like New York. New York is now down to what, 127 delegates? They were at 200 something. Now they're—
Yes, because they've gone past the deadline, their delegate count gets cut in half.
Yeah, and New York was the same state that had that unreasonably early registration deadline. So now go out, if you live in New York, go check and see. If you miss that deadline, can you still register? Can you still get a mail-in ballot? Can you still participate in your state's election in June? So these are things that you can do right now. It feels overwhelming, and I get it, it is, but this is what you can do. The other thing that is coming up on Wednesday is a general rent strike. And I think that this is an important pushback. This goes back to the Occupy movement, where if you are a renter, if you hold a mortgage, I want you to understand these numbers because they're really hard to put together. They're so abstract. We sent off the top $4 trillion to Wall Street banks. This is your Chase, your Wells Fargo, all of these places. We sent that to them off the top. And then we gave them an additional $1 trillion per day. So right now I think we're up to $9 trillion, 9 trillion with a T. We gave to the banks. And this is not the first time that we have given them money. But what have they done in return? They are completely silent about whether you can be given a little bit of a break on your mortgage payment, on your rent payment, for people who own multiple properties. Have you gotten that notice? I have a mortgage. There was nothing on my Chase statement about like, hey, we want you to survive. We care about you. We understand this is a once in a century thing. Please don't worry about your mortgage. We're going to forgive it this month because we just got $9 trillion. Nothing. So I think it's an important pushback. And then on top of it, we actually have an unlikely ally in this, Miss Britney Spears, who's calling for a general strike. Right. Now remember, Miss Britney's humble beginnings, and she got family in hard-hit states. So I wonder if some of that is coming on. And if Britney happens to be watching, we would love to talk to you directly about this. So come on, grab some coffee and join us. But I just find that remarkable that Britney Spears is talking about it, because she's one of those people that we assume has moved into a different class system, but that's not how she was raised, and she apparently did not forget where she came from. So thank you, Britney. I appreciate it.
Shave your head and join the movement.
Yeah, exactly. So I am completely out of coffee and I'm out of steam. So I
ran out of coffee 10 minutes ago.
I'm always over talking your coffee supply. I need to get you a bigger, in fact, I need to get you, we have our new coffee mugs in and available.
Yes.
So
Yes.
We need to get you one of the bigger mugs for that.
That's right. In coffee mugs is the only thing where size matters.
That's exactly the trough, the coffee trough. So,
right.
All right. Well, that's all I got.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's all I got too.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we are going to be enacting a system where we can stream to multiple channels as soon as that system comes back online, because it looks like all of their engineers are at home today too, sheltering in place. So look for that to be coming, where we will stream on multiple sites, including our website, and we are still tracking to a soft launch now on Wednesday for all of our tools and resources. So stay tuned, and Andy and I will be there on Wednesday to talk about it. So thank you very much,
Absolutely.
everybody. Have a good day.
Take care.
All righty.
This is Progressive Insider.
Yeah, Progressive Insider, you know they wiser. This that new media company covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard of, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Talking politics that the corporate news won't cover.